cartel is in it and what it gets out of it. In order to see how that functions, we must examine now the mechanism by which the Federal Reserve System creates money. How does money come into being in our country? I call it the Mandrake mechanism, named after that comic book character of the 40s, Mandrake the magician. Before I go into this, I need to warn you folks about one thing. Don't try and make sense out of this, because it doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. Just remember that this is your good old-fashioned scam, and you'll be able to understand it pretty well. Furthermore, I want to tell you that I'm going to make this sound very simple because I'm stripping out of it all of the banker language and all of the accounting terminology, and I'll speak it as best I can in plain old English. But I can assure you, even though it may sound like it's ridiculously simple, I can assure you that every part of this is 100% accurate from a technical point of view. So this is how it works. It starts with the government side of the partnership. It starts, in fact, in Congress. Congress needs money, a lot of money, far more than its income. Taxes only make up a small percentage of what Congress spends. Well, how can they spend more than they take in revenue? Here's how it works. Congress, let's say, needs $1 billion for today's expenditures. So they go down to the Treasury and they ask for the money. And the Treasury official says, you guys have got to be kidding. We don't have any money here. You spent it all back in February or March. Everything we took in taxes is gone. Not to worry, they say. Together they walk further down the street to the Federal Reserve Building. Now the Fed has been waiting for them, because that's one of the reasons it was created. They walk in, and the officer at the Federal Reserve opens up his desk drawer, pulls out a big checkbook, and he writes a check to the United States Treasury for $1 billion and signs it and gives it to the Treasury official. Now, we need to ask a question at this juncture. Who put that $1 billion into the checking account at the Federal Reserve so that they could lend it or give it to the government? Where did that money come from? And the amazing answer is, there is no money. In fact, technically, there isn't even a checking account. There's just a checkbook. And that $1 billion springs into being precisely at the instant that the officer signs the check. Now, if you and I were to do that, we would go to jail. But they can do it because Congress wants them to do it. This is, in fact, the payoff. This is the reason the government is in this partnership, because the government has instant, easy access to any amount of money at any time without having to go to the taxpayer and ask for it in the form of direct taxes. If they had to go to the taxpayer and say, well, we want to spend this, this, and this, we're going to raise your taxes another $3,000 per family this year, they'd be voted out of office. Not a popular thing to do. They like the Mandrake mechanism. But that's why the government is in it. But why is the banking cartel in it? To answer that question, we'll go back to that $1 billion check and follow some of the money. The Treasury official takes the $1 billion check and deposits it into the government's checking account, which is, of course, in a Federal Reserve Bank, so-called. And at that instant, the computers show that the government made $1 billion deposit, therefore it has $1 billion in its account, therefore it can now write up to $1 billion in government checks, which it starts to do. We'll follow just a $100 check that it writes to the postal worker that delivers our mail. He takes it now and puts it into his checking account in his personal commercial bank down the street. Now the money is finally out of the Federal Reserve Bank, so-called, out of the government side of this partnership, and it's finally into the banking side, commercial bank. $100 has been deposited, so the banker goes over to the loan window and opens it up, and he says, "Attention, everybody, we have money to loan. Somebody just deposited $100. We have money to loan." And this makes everyone joyous, because that's one of the reasons they go to the bank, is to borrow money. It's nice to know there's money to loan. So they line up for the money. But they're a little concerned because it was only $100, but the banker says, "Don't worry, we can loan you up to $900 on that." How is that possible? How can the banks loan $900 when there's only $100 in deposit? Well, it works like this. The Federal Reserve System says that the banks must keep no less than 10% of their deposits in reserve. The bottom line is that the $100 that was deposited there is 10% of $1,000. Therefore, the bank can loan up to $900, which is the difference. Now, where did that money come from? The answer is the same. There was no money. That springs into being at precisely the point at which the loan is made. Now, let's analyze it. An important difference here between these two functions. The money that was created out of nothing and given to the government was spent by the government for its projects. On the other hand, the money that was created out of nothing for the banks, they didn't spend that for their projects. They loaned it to us for our projects. But they collect interest on that loan. So the bottom line is that they collect interest on nothing, which is not too shabby. This is why the banking cartel is in the partnership, because all of this becomes legal. Interest on nothing. What are the consequences of this? This money that is created out of nothing goes out into the economy, and these new dollars dilute the value of the old dollars that were already out there. It's like pouring water into the pot of soup. It dilutes the soup. When you pour all these new dollars into the economic pot, it dilutes the dollars that are there, and so prices start going up and up and up, and we have this phenomenon of inflation, which is the appearance of rising prices. I emphasize the word appearance because in reality prices do not rise. What's really happening is that the value of the dollar is going down. If we had a money which was based on gold or silver or anything else that had intrinsic tangible value that they couldn't just create out of nothing, you would find that prices would remain stable over a long period of time. And to illustrate that point, it's interesting to know that if we had lived in ancient Rome, we would have been able, with a 1-ounce gold coin, to buy a very fine toga, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of sandals. Well, today, what can we buy with a 1-ounce gold coin? We can go into any men's store and buy a very fine suit, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of shoes. The real price of those items hasn't changed in thousands of years when expressed in terms of real money. But when expressed in terms of those paper things we carry around, Federal Reserve notes, we call them dollars, they're not, they're Federal Reserve notes, they buy less and less and less because there are more and more and more of them being pushed into the economic pot of soup. We're still not done with the analysis. So we lost some purchasing power. Where did it go? Did anybody get it? People don't ask the question, did somebody get my lost purchasing power? It's as though, well, it just evaporated. It went up into heaven or someplace. It's just gone. No. For every loser, there is a winner.